Thank you everybody for coming along when I'm sure people are hungry. So try and condense things as much as I can, and then be around over lunch if there's kind of questions or things that people want to follow up on at that stage. But yeah, in case there's any ambiguity, this is a session that is really focusing around value and impact, and I guess some of the ways in which we might go around assessing and managing it. I'm Tim Crabbe. I lead an organisation called Substance, for whom that's our bread and butter, and I'm hoping that I can share a few sort of examples and really kind of highlight some approaches without necessarily getting into all of the detail that maybe we could find time to follow up on afterwards. So if that's not what you're hoping to see, then give up your seat for many of the people waiting outside. Okay. So I'm not against these things. I quite like these things. Sort of data that tells us how many people are active or inactive, and certainly like competitive sport and seeing people winning medals and doing well in sport. But I guess in some ways that's not really been the sort of bread and butter of the way in which we at Substance go around measuring impact and value. We might think about it in the context of perhaps some of the things and directions that Tim Hollingsworth was talking about earlier as maybe being some of the old ways, or even, you know, we might say extant ways. They're kind of there, they've happened, they continue to be useful, but in terms of some of the things that we're becoming interested in around the role of physical activity, maybe they're not good enough on their own. And yeah, I just I wrote a bit of an article before, just maybe to sort of help promote this session. I don't know if anybody read it or not, but I suppose my way into this was thinking about VAR and how much I despise it. And I guess the reason that I despise it is because I am a passionate football supporter, and I suppose the reason I go to football matches more than anything else is for those moments when the ball crosses the line and I know that a goal has been scored. And now I don't know that a goal has been scored, because that kind of moment of ecstatic joy and everybody kind of going crazy that we're familiar with has sort of been attenuated in some way because of, well, hold on, let's basically overanalyze it, and let's take it outside of the moment and let's look at that kind of detail that isn't really what lies at the heart and in the essence and what the value of what football is. So when people go to a football match, my assessment is that more than anything else, they go in order to see those goals scored. They go to see that ball cross the line and share that kind of collective ecstatic experience that goes with it. So for me, that is the value that's in football that is being kind of played around with, if you like, that's being put at risk through the kind of focus on, well, actually, no, what's really important is us just technically qualifying and being absolutely certain that was indeed a goal, and or that indeed was the right player that was sent off, rather than thinking, haha, that's quite funny, they sent the wrong guy off. And then that being a sort of a shared experience of afterwards that's quite enjoyable and part of the pleasures that come with watching football. So I suppose what I'm saying is it's really important in our work that we don't lose sight of what has value, what is the kind of real value of the work that we're doing. So I'll just share a little moment with you, because the people I do like sort of overanalyzing football and that maybe kind of bring their own interpretations to football commentaries is a guy called Nick Willis, and I like to share his work when I do public presentations. So we'll just have a light-hearted moment.
What is going on here?
My word! That is quite something!
Yes, ice cool, Harry Kane. Nice and cool. And still, they can't make it count.
And the Mbappe! Mbappe!
Oh, that's a bad miss.
Well, it was coming, was it not?
Is this the opener? Yes, it is! That's what they came to see! That's my ball. Nobody else is getting it. Look at that.
Neymar, he nearly got it. He nearly got it.
He's done it again! Oh, genius! Absolute genius!
Please do check him out. There's lots more like that, and not only football ones. Yes, I suppose. Well, kind of, just picking up on that thread from not losing track of value is that increasingly, particularly with kind of Sport England's kind of current outcomes and maybe what's coming with new strategies, is that the value of sport and physical activity is different for different people. It's different for different organisations. Whether lots of people today have been talking about health benefits of physical activity that, quite clearly aren't about how many kind of gold medals that people are winning. Maybe they are related to the numbers of people who are physically active, but if for anybody that was here in the previous session, we've got to think about very, very kind of different approaches towards engaging with people with different health needs. We've had some really interesting presentations before around the kind of physical environment, how we build physical activity into people's everyday lives. We have the pleasure of working with some organisations using sport in incredibly difficult circumstances to work with people in prisons or people involved in serious kind of violent crime, and thinking about how sport and physical activity can actually play a role in addressing some of those issues. So really, when we're looking at those aspects, it's really not about measuring the kind of conventional sporting aspects. And quite probably, as we were just sort of seeing in the previous session in here, in terms of working with people with long-term kind of health conditions, you've really got to dig beneath the surface to understand what the kind of the real critical success factors are in work to be effective with often quite distinct social groups. And in terms of thinking about social value, a kind of a government piece of legislation came out in 2012, which focused on the concept of social value and kind of building social value into public procurement exercises, so that whenever public services are kind of put out there, that they have to demonstrate that there's some wider social, economic, environmental benefit that goes with that. And I think that's quite important for sport, and we found in our work that it is, because often sport, physical activity themselves are the subjects of public commissioning and procurement processes, but also because in much of our work we found that people have kind of started to look at a sport and gone, oh, hold on a second, where is the sort of the social benefit of the work that we're doing? It might be someone with some big kind of planning ideas in mind, thinking, well, actually, probably my work isn't really very kind of socially beneficial. It's really designed in order to earn the company some oodles of money. So suddenly there's an interest in what can sport offer in terms of social, economic, environmental benefits. So this act in some ways offered up some opportunities, and I want to sort of talk about some of the examples from our work and of how that's come to be the case. A quick word on substance, and I guess we do sort of three things really. We help people to gather and manage data. We provide software to help people do that in the form of views and other bespoke pieces of software that we develop for different organisations. But then we're also interested in conducting research and evaluating that data and evidence in order to kind of dig out and find the stories, to find those critical success factors, to find those little kind of nuggets of knowledge that help then, in turn, people to implement their work in more kind of efficient ways. So our kind of work, if you like, it's not kind of blue sky academic thinking. It's very focused on how do we get people to deliver greater value. So I guess the concept of value that I'm interested in is not just one that's focused on monetary terms of value, but what's the value of your work in terms of whoever it is that you might be working with and trying to deliver value for. So, a few examples. I talked about the kind of the Social Value Act and also different sort of public procurement exercises, and a few years ago we were very fortunate to work with a fantastic organisation in West London, the Brentford Community Sports Trust, which is a broad charity doing all sorts of sports work, not just related to football, but tied to the football club and using the football club's brand. Now, the football club had a bit of a need because it has that, in the middle there, a Griffin Park. It's maybe, let's politely call it a more old-fashioned football ground. One I particularly like, it's got 4 pubs on each corner of the ground. Not 4 on each corner, but one on each corner. So it makes for a nice, interesting pre-match experience. But yeah, it's a bit tired, it's a bit old, and the depth and range of the work that the Community Sports Trust does has kind of been one of the victims of that, in terms of not being able to perhaps do as much work as they would like. Now, the football club was keen to move to a new stadium, but understood that perhaps one of the ways in which they could persuade the planning authorities, because they wanted to move to one of the nicer parts of the borough, was actually to kind of emphasise the social, environmental benefits that both the football club, but more importantly, the community trust was able to deliver. And so because the trust used our views kind of system to be able to gather data around how many people that they worked with, the social sort of demographics of those people, the types of projects that they were involved in, how much they were involved in, some of the outcomes that were flowing from that, we were able to use that data to build a case, if you like. And in this case, it was a monetary case. We were able to start to put a valuation on the difference that the community trust was making to a range of people's lives, as well as kind of shining a light, if you like, on the organisational health, if you like, of the organisation and how that was being inhibited by the constraints of operating in that stadium. So that piece of work enabled us to put a valuation on the work of the community trust, but also to indicate if the club was to move to a new ground with greater facilities and greater capacity to deliver educational programmes and a whole range of other activities, then that value would grow, and that would return, if you like, to the people of Hounslow would grow. And fortunately, as a result of that, the planning application went through without too much trouble. And since that time, we've been able to work with a number of other sports organisations to help them make that case for the development of their sometimes more modest facilities, as well as other football clubs looking to develop new stadiums. Building on that theme and some of the approaches that we'd used, we've also, at a more kind of grandiose scale, been working with UEFA. And it was very interesting, the work that we've done with UEFA, because their kind of starting point of trying to understand sort of value of their work was that they had this kind of instinctive sense that football is a good thing. And really, in terms of attempting to grow participation in football around Europe, particularly working initially with Eastern European countries, there was a sense that there wasn't really that understanding of the kind of the values of participation in football or indeed other sports. Much more of a focus on the kind of elite level of sports and developing young people to be high performers. And UEFA tried to make the case that really they should be speaking to governments to invest in participation in football and other sports because of the wider social benefits that it would deliver. And the story that came back to them was, well, where's the evidence? Where's the case that can be made? And so we've had the privilege of working up a model, what you might call an econometric model, that attempts to put a value on both the kind of the economic, but also the social health and indeed the performance benefits of people playing football. We do that in a variety of different ways, from surveys that look at how much people are spending on sports equipment when they're playing the game, to also draw on hundreds of existing academic studies to understand the kind of marginal differences that being part of team sports does in terms of people's educational performance, the reduction in their risk of facing certain health conditions, the value of volunteering that underpins most sort of participation sport in this country. And I've worked with a number of different countries to be able to put a number on that impact. And certainly in terms of working with the Scottish FA, it's been quite astounding the impact that has had in terms of being able to show that nearly hundreds of millions of pounds of benefit being driven on an annual basis off the back of people playing football in Scotland has brought government to the table and opened avenues of influence such that all of a sudden the Scottish Government is interested in working with the Scottish FA both to develop their sporting activities but also to celebrate the role that the game can play and indeed to invest in the game. And I'll just show you a kind of a short video that helps to sort of illustrate the different elements within that model. Oh, lost it.
Physical inactivity costs EU countries €80 billion every year. But did you know that every amateur football player in Europe helps reduce that cost and adds value to the economy? Everything starts from the local club. Pitches need to be built, footballs, boots and jerseys to be bought, coaches to be paid. Volunteers contribute precious hours of their time. In turn, playing football regularly meets the requirements for healthy physical activity. Science shows that active people are less at risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer and mental health problems. The savings to society are enormous. More than any other sport, football impacts those at risk in society. It provides healthy activity at a crucial time. It teaches respect and discipline. It saves society on costs associated with crime and unemployment. Team sports fuel improvement in academic achievement, generating increased productivity and GDP growth. They also contribute to greater self-respect and confidence, particularly amongst girls, enabling them to have more control over their lives. The football family crosses gender, colour, ethnicity, language and religious boundaries. It enables a network of volunteers and paid staff that provides a valuable service to communities, making them richer. Football creates value for all of us, and for the first time, we can put figures on it. Welcome to the UEFA Grow Social Return on Investment model.
And I guess people might think, well, that's great for UEFA, that's got kind of oodles of cash to spend on developing models like this. But what's quite interesting around the piece of work is UEFA's commitment and desire for the work that we've been developing with them to be shared with other sports and to be shared at more local levels. So we're looking to apply that model with some kind of community level football clubs at the moment, and hopefully in time there's learning that will be shared with other sports, because having been developed, many of the kind of the methods and approaches are quite applicable. But my sense of value is that it's not always about the pounds, shillings and pence. Another fascinating project that we're involved with is a piece of work with the RNLI, been in the news just lately. I think what was particularly interesting about this piece of work is that, I don't know, if we think about it, we were inspired in some ways by the experience of the fire service in this country, which used to be very much focused on getting the biggest and the best and the fastest and most equipped fire engines, which are hugely expensive things to build and maintain. Whereas probably the best thing that the fire service could do is stop there being fires and not have any need for fire engines, and that's where the idea of the smoke alarm came into play, and firefighters spending more of their time travelling around and extolling the benefits of smoke alarms. So within this piece of work with the RNLI, we kind of applied some similar principles to sort of say, well, actually, probably the best thing for the RNLI to do is not to have to launch lifeboats, because that's the the most risky and kind of expensive thing that they need to do. But in order to do that, it was thinking around, well, what's the kind of insight you need to be able to drive to the real value of your work? And the real value of the work is obviously in terms of saving lives, preventing people from losing their lives. So it was thinking about, well, hold on, who are the people who are potentially losing their lives? Can we start to sort of segment and understand different coastal behaviours? And many of those behaviours are kind of in our world of, if you like, sport and physical activities. So yeah, we've done work with things like sailors, with anglers who like to sort of climb out to the sort of most precarious rock right at the end of the pier and run the risk of falling in, or if not doing that, catching a canoeist with their line and pulling them out of their canoe. So there's all sorts of things that are going on around the kind of coast which are risky and causing danger. And some of the people are more risky than others. So our work, if you like, was in terms of trying to understand what are the risky behaviours and who are the risky people. And then you can start to think about, well, what are the public education messages that can go out? And a focus, if you like, in terms of divers, and particularly older middle-aged divers, and thinking about, well, the risk to those people is having a heart attack when they go diving, and so having a heart test before kind of going out to sea. So I suppose what I'm doing here is trying to think about, always, you know, don't necessarily think about the usual metrics of how kind of many people, or even necessarily about the value of the work, but think about what's the real kind of importance, what's the nuggets within the work, what's the work trying to achieve, and then work back from there in terms of the insight that needs to be developed to help inform the future work. My sort of final example really is around some work that we're doing with the Sport England local pilot in Greater Manchester. So we are fortunate enough to be sort of leading a consortium around the evaluation of that pilot, and it's a fascinating pilot, perhaps quite different from the other 11 in the sense that it's a city region rather than a single place that's made up of 10 boroughs, each having different localities where work is being focused, which are incredibly contrasting. But the kind of the work in Greater Manchester is not, you know, there was actually a kind of decision taken, whilst Sport England refers to the pilots as local delivery pilots, to refer to it as a local pilot, because it's not about delivery, and focus very much on the kind of concepts of whole systems change. Many of the themes that have been running around the conference today in terms of thinking around what are the things behind, you know, what's the kind of the environment like to encourage, what's going on in schools to encourage people to be active. Can we start to think about what's the role that transport's got to play in this, what's the role that health services, that the DWP have got to play in creating an environment in which a culture of physical activity and movement becomes more normalised. So in this kind of context, as evaluators, we're stuck with well, to be honest, you don't really, in many cases, know what your plan is or what you're planning to do, because it's a kind of, you know, there's a term in terms of laying the tracks as we go. So we're playing kind of catch up, but at the same time trying to search out where are the sort of the nuggets of value within this experience. And the sort of strategic lead for GM moving in Greater Manchester, Hayley Lever, likes to show this little video that kind of helps people to sort of think in a different way around how does a movement, how does a kind of culture start to grow. And I think it's quite nice. I'll reflect on it in a moment, but again, hopefully it will be.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is over-glorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
Quite like it, and it's quite interesting in the sense of, that's something that we could apply to so many sort of different aspects in terms of trying to understand impact and value, of just sort of taking a moment to stand on the outside and watch how things evolve. Also provides us with lessons around then, well, what are we actually evaluating? What are we trying to see? And why it's been kind of interesting, and I think that Hayley likes to use it around the work that is going on in Manchester is there's a nice sort of symbolism with something else that kind of emerged around their activity with the launch of, it was just a kind of an idea really around active souls to sit alongside a conference, which kind of quite quickly had gained its own momentum in the context of a conference, of then people came along to that conference, or some people came along to that conference wearing trainers rather than sort of formal shoes. And the whole kind of idea is that actually if we're creating an environment that's designed to encourage people to be active, then let's bring it into our everyday lives. Let's encourage people to say that you can wear trainers to work. And Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, was at the conference and he was in his trainers, and other kind of system leaders were followers, if you like, and came into that room and had their trainers. It's even encouraged me to wear trainers today, because I took a walk from Euston Station down here rather than clump along in a pair of sort of business shoes. And it's a kind of an idea that has taken hold. But at the same time, as evaluators, as you're kind of looking at, in the context of GM Moving and the local pilot in Manchester, where they're trying to develop a social movement that emphasises movement, that is about encouraging active lives, it's not always kind of plain sailing as well. So the concept of active souls at one level is a campaign or a kind of social media sort of activity, and something that people coalesce around. But at other levels, it's got blockages. And so in some of the 10 boroughs, that's an HR issue. In terms of inviting whether we can allow people to come to work with trainers on. For some others, it's a health and safety issue. Well, we can't just encourage everybody, because then the bin men will want to not be wearing their boots. And suddenly you kind of get these knock-on effects which become interesting to us as sort of evaluators. and it's something which we haven't fully resolved, and I think that's kind of part of the beauty of that long-term kind of pilot that's going on in Greater Manchester, that we continue to sort of think about the measurement and the assessment of impact and value on a kind of daily basis, because that's the nature of the programme, as a kind of test and learn local pilot. Don't always think that you have to have your evaluation framework signed and sealed, done and dusted, and that you're going to measure those things come hell or high water throughout the reign of the programme. Sometimes the measurement of impact and value is about being willing to change the goalposts, move the goalposts, and kind of address what is the emergent value, what's becoming more important within your programme. So yeah, I just wanted to share those kind of few examples around thinking about kind of the demonstration of value in order to achieve an end, which can be quite a kind of short-term and useful exercise. Thinking about how we can kind of gather insight about impact and value to be able to tell a bigger story that can help to kind of influence decision makers. To think about actually what is it that we're really trying to do, who are we really trying to connect with, and understanding them in a real kind of deep sense, and whether that's to kind of inform a public education programme, or to understand better ways of kind of responding to sort of crisis situations, and using that kind of insight to be able to deliver more value through your work. Or whether it's a case of just saying, well, we don't really know what the value is yet, but we're really interested to find out, and having that kind of open-minded approach towards evaluation. They're all valid and they're all useful, and I'd be very, very happy to talk further to you about different approaches to some of the challenges that you have. We have a stall here today as well, where some of my colleagues are in the room, Adam White and Vanessa Heads, will be happy to speak to you as well. But I'm also happy to take any questions just now, if you're not absolutely famished and desperate to get off for your lunch.